And for anybody who doesn't know, my name is Phyllis Rothkopf.
Maiden name?
Excuse me?
Full name?
Phyllis, well, I have a middle name is Laura. I don't use it too often, but that is my name. I was born October 26, 1925, in my parents' house on Crown Street, Brooklyn, New York, 801 Crown Street. I don't know the time, it doesn't matter.
That's all right.
And I grew up in Brooklyn. My mother and father's name, my mother's name was Gussie, Marigold, or Goldie, whichever day of the week you happen to pick it. And I'll explain that to you. My father's name was Herman Weisbard, and my mother was born in downtown New York City. My father was born on a boat coming over from, I guess, the Austrian area. His father had passed away, and his mother she had two little girls, and she apparently was pregnant, and Daddy was born on the boat coming here. And that was always a bone of contention, because the question was he born in foreign waters or was he born on the American side?
And did he have a U.S. birth certificate?
No, I'll tell you about that. And no, he did not have a U.S. birth certificate. He did get one because he had to file for papers at the end of World War I, because otherwise he would have been considered an enemy alien, because his mother had put him in for having been born in foreign waters.
Okay, so for the war purposes, it got changed.
Exactly.
World War One.
Had he not been born in foreign waters, he could have been conscripted for the army in World War One. And she did what she wanted to do about it. And he grew up also in downtown New York City. My mother, as far as I know, my father called her Goldie, everybody else called her Gussie, and her birth certificate was Marigold. Marigold because her Hebrew name was Marion Golda,
Okay.
which translated into Marigold, I guess, in those years. Anyhow, they were both brought up in downtown New York, and my father's mother had a pair of twins after my father was born. There was another man in the picture, and when they got to be 13 years old and they were going to be bar mitzvahed, my mother's oldest sister, Annie, and my father's sister, Annie, had become friends from where they worked. And my father's sister had complained to mother's sister, Annie, that they had everything ready for the party, for the bar mitzvah. They were having it at home, and they didn't have any music. And my Aunt Annie said, well, my sister Goldie plays the piano. If you asked her to, she probably would come and play for you and give you some music during the party. And that's where my mother met my father, was at that bar mitzvah party.
And what year around, maybe?
I don't know the year. Let's see. My mother was about, let's start with the year of 1890. And she was about 17 years old when this happened. So 1790 came, 1890 I mean, went to 1900.
1907.
It could have been around 07 to 10.
Wow.
Something like that.
Right before the Titanic.
Right before
Just
the
to put it in
Titanic.
context.
And My father was about 2-3 years older than my mother. They met at the party, and from there on, they went together for a few years, and then they got married. And they lived downtown New York for a while.
Do you know what area?
Yes, I do know around Houston, around Houston Street, which is a great big street. I'm trying to think of where it might have been. It was the whole downtown area of New York at that time was like a Jewish ghetto. Delancey Street, all through that area. And they, as they say, they grew up there. My mother went to high school there, and my father. My mother became a legal stenographer. My dad was, I don't know, I guess he was just in sales. And when I have an older sister, Helen, who was, my mother was expecting with her, and they moved from New York to Brooklyn, which at that time was the suburbs. And they moved in there. My mother's sister, Dora, her brother, Eddie, and her brother, Jack. Everybody moved to Brooklyn at the same time. And my grandmother also. My grandmother, let's go back. I'll tell you a separate story, grandmother and grandfather. I'll tell it to you afterward. They lived on Hughes Street, Hewes, Hughes Street, in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, in a brownstone house. And today you wouldn't recognize the neighborhood. It's been gentrified, and there, if you got about $2-3 million, you can buy one of those houses. I think the house was originally sold after my grandmother died for about $12,000-$13,000.
Oh my God.
That's how the neighborhood changed. Anyhow, years went by. Helen was the first to come, and she was 6 years older than me. I was born in Brooklyn, as I said, in 1925. Helen was born in 1920, which would make her 5 years older, but with the months in there, it came out to 6 years. I grew up in Brooklyn. I went to elementary school there in what is known as East New York. Where we lived was Crown Heights, which was about 10 blocks away from East New York.
Okay.
And I went to elementary school in Brooklyn.
Do you remember the name?
PS 189.
PS 189?
I didn't have names then. It was PS 189. From there I went to junior high, Winthrop High School, junior high. And then from there I went to Brooklyn College, which was part of the New York State university system.
Do you remember the name of your high school too? Did it have just
Samuel Tilden High School.
Samuel
And
Tilden.
when I was about 2 or 3 years old, I had to have surgery on my right ear. I had a mastoid, which you don't hear about today, but it was a strep infection in the bone, my ear, and I had to be in the hospital, and I had surgery on that.
This was in high school or
No,
right after?
I was 2-3 years old.
Oh, okay, sorry.
That's before elementary school. And it was quite a thing. It's a good thing I was so young because I didn't really know too much about what was going on. My mother and father took on the suffering from that. Now, very quickly I will tell you, my mother was loved by everybody who met her. And she was a personality girl.
Like an extrovert type?
Not extrovert, she was just very sweet, very outgoing. She liked everybody, and she got along with everybody. And my father was tall. He was about 6'2", and on the slender side. And his hair turned silver gray when he must have been in his 40s or something like that, because I remember him very vaguely with light brown hair, but then suddenly he was gray.
Huh.
And they used to call him Silver Fox. And he was a peach. He looked like he was very strict. Everybody thought he was a police detective. I mean, that's how he carried himself. But he was just a peachy character, just as nice, just as sweet, and to everybody. And he really matched Mom because they were two people who everybody liked.
Huh.
And they had a bunch of friends used to come in the house. Saturday nights was poker night. And I was there, and Helen was there, my sister. And anyhow, the years went by. Helen went to NYU on the square. And as I say, I went to Brooklyn College. Brooklyn College was a free college. It cost me $6 a year to go to college.
$6 a year?
$6 a year, and that was to pay for my library card.
And what year now?
Now that went, let me see, I was graduated in 1947, 1947, no, it was 4 from 7, but 1943 to 47, I went 4 years.
So this was then started during the war?
Post,
Or
the war was over in 1945.
45, yeah.
So it was just, I remember it was 1941, Pearl Harbor Day.
Mm-hmm.
It was a Sunday. And that was December. That following June is when I was graduating from college. And then, from high school, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
From high school. And then I went to Brooklyn College for 4 years. And as I said, Brooklyn College was a free college. And I guess in those years we were considered eggheads. But it was, to me, college was wonderful. I had a wonderful experience there.
Now, was it typical for a female at that time to go to even that college?
Yeah, to go to a free college,
To go
yes.
to free college.
I was very fortunate. Just by accident, I went and you had to take an exam, like you take exams now. My friend Lyle called me, and she said to me, I am going, it was in August. She said, I'm going next week, I'm taking the exam to go to Brooklyn College. Do you want to go with me? So I said, yeah, sure, I'll go. You know, what have I got to lose? Anyhow, I went, and I got notification the first week in September that I was accepted in the college, and I had to show up, I think, 2-3 days later.
Wow.
But I mentioned my friend Lyle. She was a friend that I made when I was 14 years old. That was when I was first going into high school.
In Crown Heights you were living?
Living in Crown Heights.
Okay.
And anyhow, that was college, graduated. And through the years we had a good time. The families were very close. My mother's whole family was close. Uncles, aunts, cousins. I had cousins galore, mostly boys. There were just a few girls. All the rest were all male cousins. And we spent summers together. We went to the Catskill Mountains. Folks used to rent a place up there. And as all the families did, the women went up with the children and stayed, and the men came up on weekends. They would drive up together. and come up through the Catskill Mountains.
And work during the...
Oh, and they worked during the week. Yes, they all had
during the week.
jobs that they went to.
Huh.
My Uncle Jack was a dental lab person. My Uncle Eddie was an electrician for a place in New York on Park Avenue called Grand Central Palace. It was one of the only places here on the Eastern Seaboard that had a big events show, flower show, automobile shows, all the big stuff. And he was the electrician that took care of all of that.
Like a convention center almost.
A convention center, correct.
Okay.
You're right. And but all the cousins, we were all together, and every Friday night, up till the time I got married, all of us from my mother's family, all the cousins and uncles and aunts, got together on Friday night at my grandmother's house.
Shabbat.
And we had a party.
Yeah.
We didn't look to see if it was really Friday night or Shabbat or anything. We just had a party, and they were some of the best times of our lives.
Oh.
I have a cousin Ruth who's still alive, and we talk about that very often. She always says to me, "Phyllis, we had such good times." We did.
Oh.
We had fun times.
Yeah.
My mother's family was a fun family. So you laughed, you had a good time, you fooled around, you
Very
played.
lively people.
And what?
Lively.
Very lively. And Grandma always had some kind of food for us. You never went hungry. And anyhow, then when I was graduated from college, which was 1947, my mother told me, I went to the senior prom, and my mother said, you know, remember now, senior prom was on a Saturday night, and she said, remember, tomorrow we have a wedding to go to. So I know you're going to want to sleep late in the morning, but you can't sleep late because you're going to get up. You want to get yourself showered and dressed to go to the wedding. And when I got up Sunday morning, I said to her, I said, you know, Mom, I don't think I'm going to go to the wedding. I said, I'm so tired, I don't think I can stand up on my feet. Because we'd been out the night before, and you know what you do after a prom. Nobody goes home. You go to the beach or you go someplace that where you can be crazy.
Yeah, middle of the night.
And she said to me, you are going to this wedding. This is Uncle Harry's son, Martin, and you're going to go to this wedding because you can't do this. They'll have to pay for a person who doesn't show up. And she says, you got the dress to wear, you wore your dress last night, just get fixed up and go. So I got fixed up and I went. My mother and father went, my sister Helen went. And when we got there, I was told, you're sitting at a table with all single people, and Helen sat with my parents because she was older than I. She wasn't the same age as the other people. Anyhow, I sat at a table, and in fact, I was the only single girl with 6 young men. And I sat next to a young man whose name was Sidney Rothkopf. And we had a very nice evening together, and then as it came toward the end of the evening, he said to me, can I drive you home? Now, you've got to understand something, that in those years, this was unusual for a fella his age to have his own car and to drive anywhere.
How old were both of you?
I was
on that
21,
night?
and Dad was 26 going on 27. And I said, sure. I said, I have to ask my father. another unusual thing. You would never think of that today. And I got up and I walked over to my father and I said, Daddy, I want to ask you something. The young man that I'm sitting next to at the table asked if he can drive me home. He said, which one is he? And I pointed him out. He said, yes, you can go with him. But don't come late. I said, no, we'll come directly home from the wedding. So when it came time to go home, Cindy said to me, do you mind very much if we drive my friend's Dave Selman, because he's going home too. Do you mind if he comes along in the car? I said, no, not at all. Anyhow, Dad drove me to the house, and he said to Dave Selman, why don't you walk up and take Phyllis up into the house so I don't have to get out of the car? And I said to myself, what the hell kind of fella is this? He's sending his friend to take me into the hallway. Okay, fine, that went fine. Dave said good night. I said good night. I must tell you very quickly about Dad's car.
Mm-hmm.
He drove, I guess it was maybe a 1940s Mercury coupe, Mercury convertible. And the whole front of the car, where the dashboard would go, he had taken out the whole thing, and he installed his ham radio setup. Dad had been a ham radio operator from the time he was about 11 years old. And he set up an aerial, I guess you call it an aerial. You know, the convertibles had a fabric roof.
Mm-hmm.
He made a hole in the fabric. He simply cut a hole in the fabric and put his antenna from the radio up through the hole. And as luck would have it, it rained that night, and the rain comes right in through the hole with the antenna. So you just push over a little in the sea. Anyhow, he took me home, and that was Sunday night. And he said to me, I'll be calling you. I went home and I was still finishing up school. There were things I had to go back to finish up. So I went 1 or 2 days that week, and I started to think to myself, what the hell kind of fellow was this? He sends his friends to take me in the house, and now he says he'll call, but he doesn't call. Comes Thursday night. Thursday night I get a telephone call, and my mother answered the phone, and she called me to the phone. She says, Phyllis, it's, I think, the fella that you met at the wedding last week. So I went to the phone. I said, hello, well, what makes you call? He says, well, the whole gang is going out dancing Friday night in Valley Stream. It's a place called Valley Stream Inn, which I knew. It was like a little hotel, but it had a big dance thing. These were all going out dancing. Would you care to go? So my first inclination was to say no. But I said, what is this? You wait till Thursday night to call me for Friday? Anyhow, I said, okay, I'll go with you. I went, and the whole gang, he was friends with 4 or 5 different fellas. Each one of them was married. That was Seymour Levine and Maxine Levine. And the others were all single, but they all brought dates. They all had girls. So we went, and it happens we had a very good time. And I can tell you that from that night on, neither Daddy nor I, Grandpa I should say, ever dated anybody else. That was it. And you know, we knew it from the beginning.
What made you, how did you know it in the beginning?
Just the way he conducted himself. Never any nonsense, no big talk, no bragging, just a nice plain guy. And he had, I'll tell you very quickly, he went to NYU. He was graduated when he was 21 years old. And he as I told you before, he was a ham radio operator. And he had applied for a position in Long Branch, New Jersey, Fort Monmouth. And they were, in those days, they were teaching classes of women on how to make certain kinds of radios that they used involving the radio and radar. And Daddy knew all about it. He got the job. He taught out in Long Branch for about a year. He lived out there. And then he was taken into the Army. Taken into the Army, and they issued him all clothes for cold weather. And he figured he was going to Europe. It turns out he's on a ship and going across. Suddenly, he's crossing the international date line. He's in the Pacific Ocean, and he's going to the South Pacific. And that's where he stayed for 2.5 years.
And this was right after he finished NYU?
He finished NYU.
So
he
was
got his diploma.
21?
He was 21 years old.
Okay.
As I say, he worked for a year teaching at Fort Monmouth, so he was 22 when he went in the Army.
Okay, and he didn't get drafted, or he did get drafted.
Oh, he was drafted.
Yes,
In those years, all the boys were drafted.
Yeah.
And he came home. I did not know him at that time. When I met Dad, he was 47. No,
when or 27.
It was the year 47.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
He was 20, 21, 22, 23, 25. He was maybe 25, 26, something in that department.
So it was only maybe, so about 4 years since the war, since the war when you met him.
Since the war, and don't forget the war in Europe was over before the war in South Pacific.
Yes.
But he had been in the South Pacific. Terrible conditions. It was during the marches down there, the bad marches. The Japanese put all the American soldiers that they captured. It was not a good time. And of course the South Pacific is hot, humid, tropical, and generally not so good. Anyhow, while he was there, and he had been there now about 2.5 years, he got up one morning. They slept in tents, and on cots, an army cot. And he got up.
Mm-hmm.
It was time to get up. They blew reveille, and he went to get out of the bed. And when he went to stand up, one of his legs, his left leg, I believe it was, collapsed under him. And they picked him up and they took him to the medical tent. And there was a doctor there, and he looked at the knee and he said, the knee needs to be operated on. Something tore in there. And he said to Dad, I hate to tell you, Sonny, but you're going home on a hospital ship. And that's how Dad came home from the Army. He came home on a hospital ship, and he was taken by ambulance to train in New York, Penn Station, and then to Fort Devon, which is Massachusetts, Cape Cod area. They operated on his knee. We met, as I say, I told you how we met. And we went together for about 1.5 years. And one day, we were riding in the car. He still had his little Mercury.
At that time, so this was the late 40s.
Correct. And 1947.
40s.
47, 48.
48.
And we were riding up to Westchester, New York, to visit his sister and brother-in-law, Harriet and Bob, who lived in Scarsdale. And I was sitting, and suddenly, I don't know what made me do it. I to this day, I can't figure it out. All I did was I said, Sidney, I got to ask you a question. He said, yeah, what kind of question? I said, are we getting married or are we not getting married? He said, we're getting married. Why do you ask me? I said, you never have talked about it. He said, I took it for granted. He said, I figured that was your father. So grandfather, anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the 4th of July, 1949.
So your anniversary, or when he
My
proposed,
anniversary, our wedding anniversary, is November 1949.
Okay. But it was that July.
It was that July that this went on.
Mm-hmm.
And as we were riding, he said to me, you know what I think? I think that maybe it would be nice if your mother and father would meet my mother and father. I said, I think that's a good idea too. Anyhow, he went home and his mother called my mother, and they made a date, and they came to the house, and my father-in-law and mother-in-law came in, and they kind of, I guess they cased the whole place, and we sat down and we talked in the living room. And my mother-in-law-to-be said to me, what kind of a diamond ring do you like? I said, I like a round stone. And she said, you like a round stone? Harriet, her daughter, Harriet has an emerald cut, and Doris, that was his older brother's wife, has a marquise, which has points on either end. And I said, I don't like either one of them. I'm a round stone. And she turned around to Dad and she said, all right, Sidney, we're going shopping this week. We're going to buy a diamond ring. And we got married in 1949 at the Hotel Pierre, Saturday night, New York City.
That's New York City.
5th Avenue and 61st Street. Hotel Pierre. It was gorgeous.
Is it still there?
Oh, it's still there.
That's still
right.
there.
And interestingly enough, and I think about that too, I really had practically nothing to do with putting my wedding together. My mother did the whole thing.
Did she really?
She did the entire thing. I mean, nowadays, look, when a couple gets married, they know what's going on. They make the decisions
Sure.
as to which should go where, and et cetera, et cetera. But no, everything was done. All I had to do was put the wedding dress on and go. And
was that typical of the day?
typical of the day.
Okay.
Typical of the day. And but it was an absolute. It was probably the most fabulous wedding anybody ever had, outside of maybe the royalty or anything like that. And in the meantime, back at the farm, Dad had been working on a honeymoon. And he insisted he went to the travel agency that did his sister and brother-in-law's honeymoon. And wound up, we went on a trip to Europe, and we left on November, I guess it was around November 24th, 25th. And we came home the end of January.
Okay, so it was that whole time, that November to January,
Yes.
and this was 1949.
1949
49.
to 50, because we celebrated New Year's over there. Which, the whole thing, I mean, it was how I felt. I felt as though I was Cinderella and Prince Charming went and took me away.
Mm-hmm.
We sailed on the Queen Mary from here to Southampton, England, and we came home on the Queen Elizabeth. That was a QE1, the Queen Elizabeth, because we were supposed to come home on the Ile-de-France, that would be the French line, and French line had a strike, a steamship strike. So they kept us in Paris for an extra week until they got us a berth to come home on the QE1 back to United States.
And the QE, what? That's just
Queen Elizabeth.
the name.
It was all for Queen Elizabeth at the time. Queen Elizabeth, who is the queen now, became queen when she was about 23, 24 years old. She was already the queen. She's a year or two older than me, and she got married a year before me. So that's why they had, when they launched the ship, it was the Queen Elizabeth.
Mm-hmm.
There was also a QE2, but we came home on the QE1, and all luxury, 100%, 190% luxury. Going over, we sailed with a man by the name of Sir Walter Lipton, who was the owner of the tea company that makes Lipton tea.
Oh.
I mean, everybody who was anybody. And we met a young couple, probably around our own age at the time, whose last name was Balaban. Balaban is the owner and CEO of Paramount Movies. This young fella and his wife were being sent over to London to establish a new studio there, a movie-making studio for Paramount Movies. And we met them, and they were not in the upper part of the ship. They came steerage because they couldn't get a room in first class. And they were making the best of it all the way over. And she said to me one day, she said, Saturday night, we're having a party in the skylight room, which was out of sight, at the top of the ship.
Great views everywhere.
We're going to celebrate your 1 week anniversary, which was so lovely of them to do. Anyhow, we went, I'm telling you, we had a wonderful time. And the whole trip, everything about it, I'm not going to go into that, take too much time now. Sure. But we had a wonderful time. Of course, one of the highlights was when we got to Paris, and we were slated to be there 10 days. A cousin of mine, Harvey Fishman, was at that time doing postdoctorate work at the Sorbonne University. And he was living there you've heard of the Marshall Plan. Marshall Plan had put in a number of different things around the world that was post-war, post-World War II, to help out the people who had been deprived or areas bombed out or anything during the war. And Harvey was there. He went to the Sorbonne. He was taking a course. They were teaching the farmers in the India-China area how to treat their cows because they were all dying from what they called in those days cow disease. and they were teaching them how to make serum themselves to treat their farm animals. Anyhow, Harvey was in Paris, and he'd been around a bit, so he had us out every night. We went to a different place, all different things, including where Jean-Paul Sartre used to meet down in the dugouts in Paris. But we had a wonderful time. We really did. Anyhow, we came home for a honeymoon the end of January, and we had no place to live. In those years, it was very difficult to get any apartments because there'd been no building or anything going on during the war. So we stayed with my in-laws in their house for about 2 months, and then a friend of Granddaddy's, High Polivnik, owned a number of apartment houses in Brooklyn. So he found us an apartment, and we moved in there. We lived in Brooklyn in that apartment on Montgomery Street for 6.5 years.
Do you remember how much the rent was?
$75 a month. And they charged us $1.50 extra to put an antenna for the TV outside the window. $75 a month. And as I said, we lived there, and then we moved to Roslyn, Long Island. We built a house.
And what made you move to Roslyn?
All right, I will tell you what
new
made us
developments
move.
going on?
When I was graduated from college, I was graduated from college in 1947. And I immediately went to take my master's degree in English education, so that I'd be fit to teach either in high school or college. And one of the instructors I had, I went to NYU to do that. One of the instructors I had, his name was Grace Laux. And she was a lovely woman, And when I was finished, when I was graduated, when I got my master's degree in a year and a half, she said to me, Phyllis, if you ever want a job outside of New York City, she says, you come to Roslyn, Long Island. I'm the head of the board there. And she says, you have a job, no matter where you come, when you come, or what you'd want to do. So when we started looking at houses, and we went out on the island, and everybody was going to the South Shore of Long Island, etc., etc., I said, you know what, let's go look in Roslyn, because maybe if I want to get a job, I'd look up Grace Laux. So we started looking at Roslyn, which is, it is the tops that you could go in Long Island. And we bought a house, we had a house built there, and we moved in, and at that time, I had Neil, Uncle Neil, and Aunt June. Neil was about 5 years old, and June was about 3 years old. And we moved in there, and I was expecting another baby, who turned out to be Henry. So we were there, and they did have a fantastic school system. All my children went through the Roslyn school system. And that's how we got to go to Roslyn. And we lived there close to 30 years. It was a wonderful time in our lives. In the meantime, many other things happened. Dad got sick. He had developed a tumor in his throat on his thyroid gland, which was cancerous. That was removed. And he did very well I would say for another 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
He was okay. And I want to go back and tell you something
Absolutely.
else.
Absolutely.
When my grandmother, my mother's mother, whose name was Jenny, she came from the Austrian-Hungary area. And when she was about 16 years old, her father had died. He was in the Tsar's army, and he died during one of the wars. When she was 16, her mother, there was a typhoid epidemic, and her mother got typhoid, and her mother died. And she was all alone. Now, there were two older brothers of hers, quite older, who had already come to the United States. But she was there alone. And the neighbor ladies came in and they said, what are they going to do? You know, a young girl, you couldn't have her live on her own at that time. Anyhow, they were packing up her mother's things and they found a string of pearls. And they found out that the pearls were worth money. So they sold the pearls, they got money, and they used that to pay for her passage to come to the United States. So she got here, she must have been somewhere past 17 years old. And they sent her to one of her brothers, whose, I never heard a name about him, everybody called him Uncle. She referred to him as Uncle. Anyhow, she came to her brother was married, and his wife had just had a little baby, and they lived in an area, must have been Gramercy Park, downtown New York, which is in the 30s. And Gramercy Park has its own, it's a bunch of brownstones, and it has its own park. And it has a gate that you only have a key to if you buy a house. So he decided that she would make a good nanny for the baby, the new baby. That was her job in her brother's house. And her aunt and her brother's sister was not too nice to her. She wasn't a very nice person. Anyhow, so she used to take the baby out every day for a walk, and she'd go in the park because they felt it was safe for her to be there. And one day she was there walking, and the baby went to sleep, and she sat down on a park bench, and she was crying. And as she was sitting there, a very nice-looking gentleman walked by, and he sat down on the bench next to her. And this was all done in, not in Hebrew, in
Yiddish?
Yiddish. And he said to her, tell me, little girl, why are you crying? And she told him the whole story, that her mother died and that she came over here and she's with her brother and her sister-in-law isn't too nice to... She poured out the whole story. So he sat and he listened, and he said, oh, and when she was finished, she said, the baby had awakened. And she said, I have to take baby back to the house because he has to be fed. And he said to her, Jenny, I would like to walk along with you. I want to meet your brother. So he walked back to the house, and she rang the bell, maid answered the door, and brother came to the door, and she told him, God knows what his name was, and she told him, this man's name is Sam, and he wants to talk to you. So brother took a look, and he probably was pretty wise. And he said, by all means, Sam, come in, took him into his library, and they were in there about an hour talking. And Uncle came out, And he said, Jenny, I'd like you to come in. Her name at that time was Shandel, which is Yiddish for Jenny. Anyhow, she went in, and her brother said to her, Jenny, this man, Sam, would like to marry you. He says, do you want to get married? And she thought about 2.5 seconds worth. And she said, yes, I would like to get married. In her mind, she figured it's the best way she can get out of that house. Mm-hmm. And he did seem like a very nice man. He was good looking, he was dressed well. Make a long story short, they got married within a week. They had 9 children.
Wow.
And after they were married, about 3 months or so, he came to her and he told her, he said, Jenny, I have to tell you something. And she said, out with it. He said, I have a baby. She says, you have a baby? Where have you got a baby? He says, it's a little girl. She's in Canada. She's living with my wife's sisters. His wife had died in childbirth. And the baby was left there with his wife's sisters. And he said, but she must have been, at that time, maybe 3-4 months old. And Jenny said, stop telling me the story. Go pack a bag, and you go to Canada and bring me that baby. How could you be here all this time and you know that you have a baby up there? Get that baby here to me. So he did go. He went to Canada. He brought Grandma back. At that time, she was about 18 years old. And he came back with Aunt Annie. He came back with Aunt Annie. And as far as anybody knew, Annie was their 10th child. Their own children never knew.
Oh, wow.
I found out after I got married. My mother told me. Well, Aunt Annie, she was my sweetest angel. At any rate, when she was, I guess she must be getting close to a year old, my grandmother noticed that she wasn't walking right. And she took her to New York Infirmary, which is still in New York City. There is a place called the New York Infirmary. But it was supposed to have been the place to go. And they examined her and they said that at some time, during the time that she was born until then, she had had polio. And they said she probably will never be able to walk right. Make a long story short, she was in and out of every hospital in the city and down in Baltimore at the hospital there. And she wound up with braces on her legs, and she was schooled in the hospital in New York. And I don't know if they have it now, but they used to have a school for children there. And she met a young man there, a doctor. His first name was Bob. And when she was about 18, 19 years old, Aunt Annie, Dr. Bob proposed to her. And he said, Jenny, I'm in love with you. I would like you to marry me. And she said, I have to go home and talk to my mother about it, which she did. And of course my grandmother she was overcome, whoever thought that with the way she walked and with her bracelet that a thing like this could happen. Anyhow, Annie decided, she said no to him. And he would feel terrible. He said, why are you saying no to me? She said, because you're a young man, You're just starting out as a doctor. You don't need a wife who's lame or anything like that. You want to be able to get out and make a name for yourself. And it wouldn't look too good. And she never got married. Anyhow, meanwhile, the years went by, everything was fine. Aunt Annie lived with my grandmother, and they had a good life together. And when the night that Sydney's mother and father came to the house to meet my parents
For the first time.
time, they were sitting and talking, and what did they talk about? Where did you come from? Where did your family come from? And of course, everybody came from downtown New York. And my mother was, said who she was, that she had a big family, And my mother-in-law, to-be, said to her, "Was your sister's name Annie?" And she said, "Yeah." "How do you know?" She says, "Well, they all live downtown. And everybody knew Annie because she walked with 2 braces and she walked with 2 canes. And anyone who had children especially knew her." So she said, "I remember your sister." So my mother said to her, she said, "Yeah," she said, and my mother-in-law said, "She never got married, did she?" She said, "No, she didn't." She says, "Well, let me tell you about Dr. Bob. He opened a practice in one of the brownstones downtown." And she said, he met a girl. The girl's father, I hear something.
Nope. Yeah, no, we're good.
The girl's father was the chairman at the New York Infirmary. And he introduced him to her daughter. And he married the daughter. They married the daughter, and the girl got pregnant, and she went to the hospital to have a baby, and she never walked again. That was Bob's wife.
Oh my God.
And she was in a wheelchair the rest of her life. And everybody in the neighborhood knew the story. So, it's a funny thing. Life is funny. But I have to say, my sister and I were probably 2 of the luckiest people in the world. We had wonderful parents. My mother and father, you couldn't top them. Like somebody said to me, when you were a kid, we went through Depression time, my father and mother. Helen and I never knew it, but they did. And I was saying, I never had to ask for anything. In our house, you didn't have kids wheedling things out of you, or, "Oh, Mommy, could I have this?" It never happened. My mother had the head. She knew when we wanted something. She knew when we needed something. There was never any such thing as, "Why can't I have that?" or anything. It just didn't happen. I'm not going to tell you that they spent money like mad, because they didn't. They couldn't afford to. But my mother and father were 2 very unusual people. And very lucky, how lucky we were to have them for parents. And I have to tell you, the rest of my life has been lucky. As I say, I was just very fortunate that I had the parents I had, and I had a husband like nobody else had. Whoever had met him, people that I speak to today, and he's gone now, it's almost 10 years. It seems unbelievable that it's 10 years. Talk about him only as what a lovely and nice man he was. In every way. He was a good son, He was a wonderful husband and a most devoted father. Now, a lot of time children don't even think about their parents that way because, you know, that's the boogeyman. But he was a wonderful father. And he was a wonderful grandfather. You may not remember him that well. Aaron maybe remembers a little bit more. But he was a devoted person. His family counted with him more than anything in this world. He had his own disappointments, yes, he did. But he always used to say, because I used to talk when there were things went on, like with the Vietnam War, the Korean War. Neil was just about the age where he would be drafted if they would be taking the boys. And I was always so worried about that and concerned about it. And he used to say to me, you know, hon, it's not the worst thing that could happen. The Army wasn't that bad. Look, I went and I came home and I'm perfectly okay. Which was true at face value. But I remember when we got married, for about a year or two, the terrible nightmares he had. Terrible.
So looking back, you do believe that he, as
He
many
was-
people did, had some trauma.
He was affected. There is no question about it. He never talked about it. He never complained about anything. Everything was rosy.
Later in life, did he ever get to talk a little
No.
bit more?
No, he didn't.
Mhm.
He was, Sidney never complained about anything. Everything was always okay with him. As Erica says, you and Sidney always belonged to the fine family. Everything was always fine. And as I say, I really consider myself an extremely lucky person. The only real unlucky thing that ever happened to me was that the good Lord took him away from me too soon.
Mm-hmm.
He could have been here another 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I need him here to argue with, and to have everybody used to say to me, Phyllis, you are a very strong woman. Maybe I was. But I can tell you that he was my strength. I knew that I had a strong pillar standing behind me. If I was wrong about something, he told me about it. We were very straight with one another. If anything wrong was going on, he would say, you know, hon, maybe you shouldn't have said that or that. But I knew that I had someone straight there. Never lied to each other. A white lie, maybe, I don't know. Maybe just to make the other person feel better or whatever it would be. And as we went along, my children went away, they went to college. They were off on their own. Your mother got married, and she had you and Aaron. And then Neil got married, and along came Mel, and then Charlie. And I did stay very close with Dad's nieces. That was his sister, Bob and Harriet's two daughters. We are still close. Not with anyone else in Daddy's family. Not for no particular reason. It just happened that way.
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you that my mother-in-law and father-in-law were wonderful to me, next to my own parents. Papa was with me longer than my mother-in-law died, just before Neil was born. Papa was there about 4 or 5 years longer. And anything that I wanted, all I had, many times I didn't say what I liked, because I knew that if I said something, it would come. But they were very good to me. And I knew that they liked me, which was more important than anything. Mm-hmm. And as far as my children are concerned, I happen to be very proud of them. Maybe I don't say it to them often enough, but I have 4. I'm not going to tell you they're perfect, because nobody is perfect. But I have 4 upstanding people who I never have to be ashamed of, who know how to take care of themselves, and other people look at and say, these are good people. All of them are good, decent people. Have faults? Yes. We all have faults. Nobody goes through life without a fault, or for a few of them. So, as I can say, I am 93 years old. I will be 94 in October. Hopefully. I'm planning on it. And I have had a fortunate life. And one of the best fortunes is Julie, who is sitting here with me now.
It's an honor. I feel absolutely honored to be here with you. And I do wish that we got to spend more time together.
It would be nice.
But just know, as I heard you retelling about your own family, and many people I did not even get to meet or were not around when I was born, left such a mark with you. And it's so obvious to me that these people that affect us so deeply, that raise us, that we experience in life, continue to have an impact on you. And I can't help but think with these, hearing about how lively and wonderful your parents were.
They were terrific.
At these certain memories and experiences, that it was actually passed through. That type of love and energy, I see that passing through, and that was in your family growing up in Roslyn. Hearing from my mom, your house was quite a lively house as well, with people and life and,
right.
and people wanting to hang out there.
And that's a good lesson to be learned. As a friend of mine wrote in a song, a house is not a home. A home you have to make. Just because you put up a house with bricks or however you want to build it, it's the home that counts and what you put into your home.
And I see that even with what my mom provided for
Your mom has done a fantastic job.
Absolutely, and for Aaron and I, and passing that on, passing that innate love and positive energy in our home was a very lively place as well. It was quite a hangout spot, and it's amazing to really draw that connection
Yes,
all the way back.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I'm just delighted to see it. I'm delighted to see it. I see you. I see Aaron, and you may not remember, dear, but when you were little, You were here with me quite a bit. And I cherished every minute of it. It was nothing to do. Or with Aaron sitting in his car seat in the back of the car. And every time Grandpa had to stop at a red light when he was driving, you would hear, "Grandpa, go, 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 light green."
The backseat driver.
He was a backseat driver.
I have many, many memories with you and Poppy here in this home.
I hope so.
I have many, many memories. I was young, but I remember very, very much. I remember Poppy very, very well.
Yeah, I know. He adored you kids. He would have torn himself in half for you. And I remember sitting, putting you to bed at night, and you would say, "Tell me a story." And I ran out of breath to tell me, "I want a white doggy story. Now tell me a puppy story." And you thought of all kinds of things. You were very inventive as to what kind of stories I should tell you. But I loved every second of it. So, and as I said, as far as my own children are concerned, I don't think that I would want anything different or better. Because I appreciate, and if Grandpa were alive, he would be so proud of all the children. Because you turned out to be good people, which was very important to us. Didn't matter how much money you had, didn't matter if you got A's in school or D's. We collected a number of D's. And we were satisfied that you were who you were. And that's why I say now, I can have a free mind when I look at my own children, when I look at my grandchildren. I look at you and Aaron, and I am so proud of you. And Neil's children. And that's me, and I hope I'll be here. One never knows. I heard of a woman the other day. Excuse me. Ha ha. I am not practicing. I am trying to clear my throat. Who's 101 years old, and nobody likes her. Her own children can't come to her. But she's such a nasty person and always angry. And she regrets the fact that she lived to be this age because she feels she should have been dead 20 years ago. Probably not a happy woman, nor had she ever been. And this woman who was telling me the story about her said, I go from her, and then I sit and talk to you. And I said, me? I have to live for a whole lot longer. There's so much going on, and so many things being done, and so many new inventions, and a life. And my grandchildren, I want to see them grow up, and they should be people. I said, I can't go anywhere yet.
You're at Aaron's wedding.
I was at Aaron's wedding.
Melody's
wedding. Right. And they were occasions. And I see a lot of things. And I'm a great-grandma. I got 2 darling little great-grandchildren, Stephen and Margot, who doesn't talk to me a whole night, but on the way out waves goodbye. glad to go. And Stephen, who was an absolute darling little boy. And what else? And a lot of other things went on in my life, dear. Not necessary to repeat everything.
Well, and I think for right now, that, you know, ending it or at this time
Is a good idea.
And I would love in the near future to do another one, another video, maybe focusing on more of a certain point or experience or span of years.
We could do that.
As well.
There were plenty of incidents in our life. Plenty of them. But it was a good life. And up until the time that Dad really got sick, which was around 1993. No, we moved out here in 1983. Yeah, around 93.
Mm-hmm.
We had a golden life. We really did. And unfortunately, it hit him hard. And I will tell you that probably the last 5 years of his life, I had made up my mind. I gave up everything that I did. I was always very active in the community, in Jewish affairs.
Mm-hmm.
When we lived in Roslyn, my picture was in the paper, in the newspaper, almost every day. And I made up my mind. I said, I'm giving it all away. The only thing I want to do was be with Sidney and take care of him. I felt that he was one of the good guys, and he deserved to get that attention. And I did. I gave it to him 24 hours a day for every day that he was here. And that's the way it should have been.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not telling you I want a medal for it or anything else. It's just the way it was. And I never looked for anybody else after he left. I wouldn't even bother, because I don't think that, I meet a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
When we were in business, I met mostly men. Some were nice, some were not nice. But I have to tell you, I never met a person like him. He was a very unique man for his age and from where he came from. When he died, my friend Silverdee, you remember my friend Silverdee? She wrote a little thing about him. And she wrote, Sidney Rothkopf, a very gentle man who lived his life as a gentleman. Like, everybody was okay. He didn't care who they were, where they came from. If it was someone who spoke to him, they were good people. They were nice people. Everybody was all right. And one of the things he specifically said to me was while he was sick. We were sitting and talking one night, and he said to me, "Hon, one thing you got to remember. Don't be afraid. Never be afraid." Because if you're afraid, it's going to keep you back from a lot of things in your life. Don't be afraid. And I do think of that very often.
You know, and that leads me in, just as we're nearing the end, And maybe this could be your answer, but what would be your advice to Aaron and myself, let's say, and to Melody and Charlie and to other family members of how to continue in the future leading our lives?
Try to be the best that you could be. That doesn't mean that you have to have 44 degrees with letters after your name. It also doesn't mean that you have to make a few $1 million. We have an example of that. It means be a good person. Have feelings for the next guy. Be respectful of everybody. You be respectful, you're going to get it back. Just be a good person. Try to be nice. If you have a husband, a wife, if you have children. Children, yes, you have to teach them, but respect them also. The same respect that you would give anybody else. Respect. It doesn't happen if it's the guy who sweeps the street,
Mm-hmm.
or the one who comes in and does your cooking for you. I'm happy with a cook. Anybody, have respect. I mean, I look at all of you, and as I said to you before, I am so proud of all of you because you grew up to be people. Whatever you are when you're little, when you're a baby, when you're a little child,
Mm-hmm.
children are children. And they do and perform a lot of times that you don't care for. Most times you love them. First of all, you gotta love children. God forbid if you didn't love your children, could you imagine what would happen? So you're gonna love your children.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna love who comes afterward. You're gonna show respect to your parents. And I will tell you, respect yourself. Have the respect for yourself too.